Let's bring in Paul Kelly, Editor-at-Large at the Australian newspaper. Paul has been at the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue in Perth and joins us from there this morning. I think Richard Marles was there as well the last couple of days. I know Josh Frydenberg, the Deputy Liberal leader, plenty of others as well, Paul. Always a fascinating discussion. You wrote this weekend about this big issue of getting the balance right with China and the US-China relationship as well. And look, I thought you made a very good point in arguing this is no all or nothing situation. There's no black or white solution for Australia. We have to live with both America and China and try to make it work. That you said any all or nothing mentality will end in abject failure. Is there, do you think, too much of the black or white in this debate at the moment?
Well, I think it's very important, David, that we get away from any simplified black and white thinking here. This is not a rerun of the struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War, which ended with the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the end of communism. And I think parallels with those events are completely misleading. What we face here is an ongoing situation in which there will be coexistence and competition between the United States and China, and that of course means that Australia will be deeply involved in this. The way this coexistence and competition between America and China plays out, the damage that's done, the extent to which both countries are hurt by this rivalry will have profound consequences for Australia. And of course what will be very important will be the changing strategic balance. But that's the way we've got to think about it. There's going to be no ultimate winner and ultimate loser in this situation. This means that we face the sort of challenge we have not faced before as a country. Australia will have to deal with the rising power of China in this region, and of course we're very committed to seeing an ongoing United States engagement in this part of the world as well.
Look, Scott Morrison does seem to be trying to strike that balance. His predecessors as Prime Minister have done that as well, but it is becoming more difficult, particularly when we see the Trump administration very overtly putting the pressure on Australia. Mike Pompeo was here last weekend for the AUSMIN talks and had that line about don't sell your soul for a pile of soybeans. Is it becoming more difficult, do you think, and is Scott Morrison right, particularly this week also sidestepping the Andrew Hastie remarks largely?
Yeah, well, look, it's certainly becoming more difficult. And what I've argued, and I think this is pretty clear, is that Australia is now being squeezed by these two giants. And the more their rivalry deepens, the more we're going to be squeezed. So essentially, what's happening with China is, as China sees our security ties with the United States deepening, China's got the capacity to retaliate against Australia. And we've seen signs of this already in terms of trade. Ministerial contacts between Australia and China have been diminished. So there's a question mark about the strength of our ties with China. On the other hand, if you look to the United States, what the United States is doing is it's deepening its strategic competition with China. Now, in a sense, that's what Australia wants. Australia wants the United States engaged in this region. But the problem we face is Donald Trump's economic war against China. And Trump is engaged in this trade, technological, and now this currency battle with China. This is extremely damaging to the global economy. It's damaging to the world. It's damaging to regional economies, and it will certainly hurt Australia. So in this sense, of course, Australia is being squeezed by both of these giants. So far, I think the response from Scott Morrison has been pretty sound. He gave that speech after the election in June in which he set out his framework. But the truth is that there's not a lot we can do to influence these two powers.
Certainly not on the trade war, that's for sure. They're both playing to domestic constituencies here, and there's no sign that they're backing off or reaching an agreement anytime soon. I mean, as you argue, Paul, it's understandable where Trump's coming from in his anger towards China's trade practices, but his solutions are flawed and likely to result in serious unintended consequences. That's what we're seeing play out right now, isn't it?
Well, that's right, David. And here I think it's really important to make a fundamental distinction. The increasing United States concern about China and response to China and American rivalry with China is not just a Donald Trump phenomenon. This is now right across the American political system. And what we're seeing is a fundamental reassessment by the United States of how it deals with China. And there's an across-the-board recognition that the days of mutual benefit from engagement are over. They are over. And that sentiment is going to last beyond Donald Trump. What is unique to Trump is the Trump solution. And that is a fundamental problem for Australia. The Trump solution is extremely counterproductive. It's a trade war, a currency war, a technology war, and essentially it's a unilateral approach. It's based on zero-sum approach to trade. It's based on a flawed understanding of the global economy and international trade policy and trade balances. And this is the problem for Australia. What I've argued is that Trump's particular solution is not going to work. It'll damage the world economy. It's forcing the Chinese to dig in further. So we see a further, if you like, a race to the bottom in terms of this economic competition between the two countries. And that's simply going to hurt Australia. We need to be trying to persuade Trump to pull back and rethink in terms of his basic approach to China. But I ask you, David, what chance do you really think that Scott Morrison's got of persuading Donald Trump to change his mind? I mean, you know, we have to be realistic about this. And in this sense, we have to deal with this very unpalatable and challenging world the way it exists, not the world of our dreams. It's going to be very difficult for Australia, and it's going to get, I think, even more challenging for us.
Indeed, it won't be just all bells and whistles when Scott Morrison heads to Washington to meet Donald Trump next month at the White House. Some very difficult issues as you lay out there to get into. Paul Kelly, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Appreciate that. We'll catch up during the week. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, our panel will touch on that, but also some of the other big issues of the week. Stay with us.